The night was supposed to be filled with celebration. David Delgado had everything ahead of him: a full scholarship to Stanford, a future brighter than most could imagine. But by midnight, his world would be shattered. His family was dead, and he was the only one left to tell the tale. Before we dive into the story, what's the darkest case you've ever heard or experienced? Write it in the comments. Let's compare notes. Also, tell us where you're watching from today and what time it is right now. We're building a community of truth seekers who aren't afraid of the dark. Now, let's continue with the story. David Delgado stood at the front of the room, the echo of applause still ringing in his ears. As the valedictorian of his high school, he was the shining star of his immigrant family, the proof that dreams could indeed be realized. The Delgado family had come to America with nothing but hope and grit, and David was their crown jewel. His parents, Maria and Javier, worked tirelessly in their small corner of San Francisco, giving their children every opportunity they could. His younger sister, Isabel, was the apple of their eyes, and David, always the diligent student, had never been more determined to make them proud. But that night, June 8, 1951, would prove to be the last time his family would ever know peace. The graduation party was in full swing at their home, a modest two-story building in a working-class neighborhood. 40 guests filled the space, laughter and music mingling with the sweet smell of barbecue in the air. David's parents beamed with pride, offering drinks and shaking hands with friends and neighbors. Isabel, too young to fully appreciate the significance of the night, bounced between the adults and the other kids, her face lit up with a mischievous grin. It was a night of hope, of celebration, a night where everything seemed to align for the Delgado family. For David, the moment was bittersweet. The scholarship to Stanford was a dream come true, but it came at a cost. His father, Javier, had made it clear that anything less than medical school was a failure. "You're the smartest one in this family, David. Don't make me ashamed of you," his father would say. David's heart was heavy with the weight of his father's expectations, and yet he knew in the deepest part of him that he was willing to do whatever it took to prove himself. That night, after the guests had begun to thin out, David stood on the balcony, looking out over the bay. The Golden Gate Bridge loomed in the distance, its massive structure a symbol of progress and the future. David's thoughts were clouded, doubt mingling with hope, anxiety wrapped in pride. He felt trapped between the image his family had of him and the person he longed to be. Minutes before the clock struck midnight, everything changed. David's mind snapped to attention as the sound of footsteps approached from behind. He turned quickly, his heart racing. There was no one there. The house was eerily quiet now, a stark contrast to the bustling party earlier. Something wasn't right. He was about to step inside when a shadow moved across the doorway. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but the empty hallway. Panic set in, and David's feet moved before his brain could fully catch up. He rushed back inside, eyes darting across the room. It was then that he saw the blood. The carpet, once clean and welcoming, was stained with it, dark red and pooling in places where it shouldn't be. His heart pounded in his chest as he ran toward the stairs. His parents' voices had fallen silent. There was no more laughter, no more life. David's pulse quickened. "Mom! Dad!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the silence. He found his parents in the living room, motionless. Maria, his mother, lay on the floor, her eyes wide open, a look of shock frozen on her face. Javier was slumped in the chair, lifeless. And Isabel, David's breath caught in his throat as he turned to find his younger sister lying in the hallway, her tiny body sprawled unnaturally. The life had been taken from them in an instant. Tears blurred his vision as he stumbled backward, his legs giving way beneath him. He collapsed onto the floor, feeling a deep emptiness spread through his chest. The world around him had come to a standstill. The family he had known, the people who had believed in him, were gone. But in that moment of horror, there was something else, something David couldn't understand. He had been out of sight for just a few minutes, but what had happened in that brief span of time? Had anyone seen anyone leave? No. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence of a break-in, just death. The police arrived in the early hours of the morning, their presence a blur of flashing lights and questioning faces. David was too numb to understand their words. His hands were stained, his gown torn, his face etched with grief and disbelief. But none of that mattered now. The questions started almost immediately. What happened, David? Who did this to your family? David's response was simple, almost robotic. A masked man. He came through the door. But the detectives found nothing to corroborate his story. No one had seen anyone enter the house. No one had heard anything unusual. The security footage from the surrounding area showed no one entering or leaving the Delgado home that night. There were no witnesses, no clues, just silence. As the investigation progressed, David's story remained consistent. A masked figure, a brutal attack. His family was gone, and David was the only one left to explain it. But as the police dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing revelation. A few weeks before the tragedy, David's best friend, Richard, had come forward with a shocking confession. David had told him something that chilled him to the bone. My father said if I don't become a doctor, I'm dead to him. Maybe he should know what dead really feels like. Richard had brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just another one of David's dramatic rants. But now, in light of the murders, those words took on a darker meaning. Could David have been more involved in his family's deaths than he let on? The investigation turned from a simple case of a masked intruder to something much more complicated. Could David have killed his own family? Was this the tragic result of years of pressure from his father and the expectations placed on him? The hours bled into days, and David's story remained the same. He claimed he couldn't remember what had happened after he found his family dead, but that didn't stop the questions from mounting. The police had no answers, only more doubts. How could a teenage boy, so full of promise, be involved in such a horrific act? In the days following the tragedy, David was arrested, and the trial began. The world watched, captivated by the case of the valedictorian who had lost everything. It was a story too tragic to be true, but in the silence of the courtroom, the truth remained elusive. Did David have the capacity to commit such a crime? Or had the pressure from his father and the expectations placed on him been too much? For now, the answers were out of reach. But one thing was certain. David Delgado's life, once filled with promise, had been irrevocably changed. And the mystery of his family's deaths would haunt him, and everyone who followed his story, forever. The days after the deaths of David's family blurred into one long, suffocating nightmare. He had gone from being the golden child of the Delgado family to the prime suspect in their brutal slaying. The shock of it all was overwhelming, like a thick fog that refused to lift. David's mind, once sharp and focused, was now consumed with confusion and fear. What had happened to his family? Why had they been taken from him? The police investigation dragged on, turning over every stone, looking for any clue that might explain the unexplainable. But the more they looked, the more they realized how little they had to go on. No forced entry, no witnesses, and nothing on the security footage. The house was eerily untouched, as if the intruder had never even been there. David's claim of a masked figure didn't match the evidence, but his emotions were too raw for anyone to dismiss his words entirely. David was interviewed several times, but his story never wavered. He insisted that he had seen someone, a masked man, who had come into their home and killed his family. Yet his recollection of the events seemed fragmented, disjointed, like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. Each time the police asked him more about the intruder, David's responses grew more hesitant, as if the mask he claimed to see wasn't as clear in his memory as he first thought. The most unsettling discovery came when Richard, David's closest friend, spoke out. He revealed that David had confided in him weeks before the tragedy, sharing a chilling conversation about his father. "My father said if I don't become a doctor, I'm dead to him. Maybe he should know what dead really feels like," David had said. At the time, Richard had thought nothing of it. But now, in light of the horrific deaths, those words took on a darker, more sinister meaning. The police were now forced to consider another possibility. Had David, driven by his father's crushing expectations, snapped and killed his family? His father had always been hard on him, pushing him to be the best, demanding perfection in every aspect of David's life. Could that pressure have been the breaking point? David's defense attorney tried to push back, claiming that the trauma of losing his family had broken him, that his grief was so overwhelming it had clouded his memory. But as the trial approached, the evidence was stacking up against him. The more the police dug into his past, the more they found troubling details. David had always been a model student, a quiet achiever, but the pressure he faced at home was enormous. His father had never been satisfied, always pushing for more, always reminding David that anything less than greatness was failure. The courtroom was tense as the trial began. David sat at the defense table, looking every bit the part of the troubled teenager, his face pale and haunted, his eyes heavy with the weight of his grief. The prosecutor, a sharp and experienced woman, wasted no time in painting David as the prime suspect. She used the conversation with Richard to suggest that David had, at the veriest, entertained the thought of ending his father's life. If that was true, could he have gone further, actually carrying out the unimaginable? The defense tried to counter by emphasizing David's emotional state, his grief over losing his family. They presented expert testimony that David might have suffered from dissociative identity disorder, a condition that could explain his confused recollection of the events. According to the expert, the trauma of the murders, coupled with the years of pressure from his father, might have caused David to mentally fragment, losing touch with reality. As the trial wore on, David's emotional state became more erratic. He would often zone out, his eyes distant, as if the weight of everything that had happened was too much for him to bear. But in those moments, something else began to emerge, an unsettling sense that David wasn't entirely in control of himself. His behavior seemed almost mechanical at times, like someone who had been hollowed out by grief and guilt. The prosecutor seized on these moments, suggesting that David wasn't just grieving, he was hiding something. The mask he had spoken of might not have been a figure at all. What if it had been a metaphor for the part of himself he couldn't face? What if, in his fractured state, David had become the very thing he feared? With each passing day, the tension in the courtroom grew. The jury watched as David's world unraveled piece by piece. His family's death had changed everything. And now, As the trial neared its climax, the question remained: could a man who seemed so broken be capable of such an unfathomable crime? David, once the golden child, now stood on the precipice of a future more uncertain than ever. The truth, whatever it was out there, but it remained locked inside a mind that seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. As the days in the courtroom wore on, the tension grew unbearable. David sat, his face a mask of despair, listening to the voices around him, his lawyer, the prosecutor, and the jury's murmurs. He had been thrust into a nightmare, forced to relive the horrors of the night his family was murdered. Each question seemed to pierce deeper into his fragile mind, and with every word spoken, his guilt or innocence seemed to hang on the edge of a razor. The final days of the trial brought forth a shocking revelation. The defense team had been digging through David's personal files, hoping to find something that could help them argue that David was not entirely responsible for his actions. That's when they stumbled upon a letter David had written just weeks before the murders. The letter was addressed to a renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Harold Pierce, who had been researching dissociative identity disorder for years. In it, David spoke of his growing unease, his feeling that something inside him was not quite right. He described episodes where he felt disconnected from himself, as though someone else was in control of his actions. In one chilling passage, David wrote, "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself. I hear voices, see things that aren't there. I'm afraid I might hurt someone if I don't get help." This letter became the defense's pivotal argument. They argued that David's deteriorating mental state, combined with the immense pressure from his father, had led him to develop dissociative identity disorder. The condition, they claimed, could explain the fragmented memories of that night. Memories that seemed to shift and distort with each retelling. The prosecutor, however, dismissed the letter as nothing more than an attempt to cover up the truth. "This is nothing more than a desperate plea," she argued. "David is trying to avoid the consequences of his actions by claiming he wasn't himself that night. But we have to ask, if David truly didn't know what he was doing, why didn't he seek help before?" But the letter had already caused cracks in the prosecutor's case. The jury was left questioning whether David was a cold-blooded killer or a young man who had been consumed by forces beyond his control. The trial seemed to reach a standstill. The more the prosecution pushed, the more the defense presented evidence of David's psychological state. The courtroom grew silent as the final witnesses took the stand. And then, just when it seemed like the case would drag on forever, the prosecution revealed something they had been holding back. A new witness had come forward, someone who might hold the key to understanding what had really happened that night. The witness was an old neighbor, Mrs. Marlowe, who had lived next door to the Delgado family for years. She had always been a quiet woman, content to stay out of other people's business. But one night, as the trial unfolded, Mrs. Marlowe had approached the police with a strange story of her own. She claimed that on the night of the murders, she had seen something unusual. A man, masked and dressed in dark clothing, leaving the Delgado home in a hurry. But it wasn't David. It was someone else entirely. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Mrs. Marlowe had seen someone else? Someone who wasn't David? The defense seized on this new lead, arguing that there was indeed another person involved, someone who had carried out the brutal killings, while David remained oblivious, trapped in his own fractured mind. But the prosecution was not willing to let go of their theory. They insisted that Mrs. Marlowe's testimony was nothing more than a misinterpretation, that she had simply seen David in his panic-stricken state. They pointed to the fact that no other evidence of the masked intruder existed. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could support her claim. The case now rested in the hands of the jury. The tension was palpable as they deliberated, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. Would they convict David, sending him to prison for the rest of his life? Or would they find him not guilty, allowing him to live the life his family had dreamed of for him? David sat in his chair, his hands trembling, his mind clouded with uncertainty. He had been through hell in the past few days, his family's death, the investigation, the trial, the constant barrage of questions. And now, all he could do was wait. Wait for the decision that would shape his future, his very existence. The jury finally returned, and the courtroom fell into an eerie silence as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. David's heart raced, each beat louder than the last, as the tension reached its peak. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. David sat frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as Richard's words echoed in his mind. Someone else. Someone who wasn't him. The idea seemed impossible, yet Richard's fear was palpable. David could see it in his eyes, the same fear he'd seen when he had learned about the murders. "Richard, what are you talking about?" David's voice was hoarse, as if the words themselves were too heavy to speak. Richard's hands shook slightly as he leaned forward, his voice low. "David, I didn't want to believe it at first, but I think you weren't the only one in that house that night. You didn't kill your family, not on your own. There's something else, something you've been hiding, something you can't remember." David felt a wave of nausea. He had always trusted Richard, but what he was saying now seemed so absurd, so impossible. "You're saying, what? That I wasn't the one who killed them?" His mind raced to comprehend what Richard was implying. He didn't want to believe it, but a part of him feared it was true. He couldn't remember the events clearly. The gaps in his memory were starting to make sense. Richard nodded, looking down at his hands. "I don't know how to explain it, but I saw you. I saw you standing in the hallway that night, but you weren't you. There was something different in your eyes. It was like you weren't even aware of what was happening." David's pulse quickened as he recalled that night, the disorienting feeling of being trapped in his own body, unable to control his actions. Could Richard be right? Could there have been another person, a part of him, that had taken over and committed the murders? "You saw me?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "But I don't remember anything after I found them. I don't remember anything at all." Richard leaned in closer, his voice urgent. "You were standing there, but not yourself. I thought I was imagining things. I didn't say anything to the police because I didn't know what to think. But now, after all of this, I'm starting to wonder if there's something in you, something you've blocked out." David's mind was spinning. The words Richard spoke felt like a key unlocking something deep inside him, but it also terrified him. Could he have been the one to do it? Could his own mind have betrayed him? "Why didn't you tell the police?" David asked, his voice cracking. Richard looked away, guilt written across his face. "I didn't want to believe it, David. I thought maybe I was just imagining things. But now, with everything that's happened, I don't think I can ignore it anymore." David ran his hands through his hair, trying to make sense of the fragments of his own memories. He had always struggled with the pressure from his father. But had that pressure really led him to snap? Or was there something more at play, something far darker that he couldn't comprehend? "I need to know the truth," David said quietly, almost to himself. I need to remember what happened." Richard's expression softened, and he placed a hand on David's shoulder. "We need to figure this out together. I don't think the truth is as simple as you think. You might not be able to remember, but there are others who might hold the key." David stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "What do you mean? Who else?" Richard hesitated, then spoke, his voice trembling. "There's someone who might know. Dr. Pierce, the psychiatrist you wrote, too. If anyone can help you understand what happened, it's him. He's been working with cases like yours for years. He might have answers." David stared at Richard, his heart pounding. He had never considered seeing Dr. Pierce before, but now it felt like the only way to uncover the truth. "I need to talk to him," David said, more to himself than to Richard. Richard nodded. "I think it's the only way." The next morning, David made the call. Dr. Harold Pierce's office was quiet, almost sterile, as if the place itself held the secrets to hidden minds. When David spoke to the receptionist, he was told that Dr. Pierce had been expecting his call. David wasn't sure if that comforted or frightened him more. Hours later, he sat in the waiting room, the cold, clinical air making him feel distant, as if he was already being pulled from reality. The door opened, and Dr. Pierce entered, his expression kind but cautious. "David," Dr. Pierce said, extending his hand. "I've been following your case. You've been through a great deal. Let's see if we can find some answers, together." David felt a tremor in his chest as he shook the doctor's hand. "I don't remember what happened, Dr. Pierce. I need to know. I need to understand." Dr. Pierce nodded slowly. "We'll take this step by step. Sometimes the mind can block out memories to protect us, but we can work through it. You're not alone in this." David took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever would come next. He didn't know if he was ready to face the truth, but he knew he had no choice. The questions, the fear, the confusion, it all had to end, no matter what it took. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small desk lamp on Dr. Pierce's desk. David sat across from him, his hands clenched together in his lap, trying to keep himself composed. The air was thick with the weight of everything unsaid, the silence punctuated only by the sound of David's shallow breathing. Dr. Pierce sat calmly, his eyes locked on David's, his expression neutral but focused. "You mentioned in your letter that you've been experiencing moments where you felt detached from yourself, almost like someone else was in control. Is that correct?" David nodded, feeling the sting of those words. They felt too close to the truth. "Yes, I've tried to remember what happened, but I can't. It's like there's a part of me that I can't reach." The doctor didn't look surprised. Instead, he scribbled a few notes in his journal. This is common in cases of dissociative identity disorder, or DID. It's a condition where a person's mind fragments, often in response to severe stress or trauma. It sounds like you've been under tremendous pressure, especially with your family's expectations of you. David swallowed, the lump in his throat growing. "It's more than that, though. I feel like there's something I'm missing. Something I should remember." Dr. Pierce leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but firm. "We'll get to that. But first, I need you to trust me. This process might bring up memories or feelings that are painful, but it's the only way to move forward. Are you ready?" David hesitated, his mind flashing back to the night his family was killed. The blood, the silence, the horror. But what haunted him more than anything was the feeling that he wasn't alone in his own skin. He could still hear the whispers in his head, a voice that wasn't his own. "I'm ready," David said, his voice tight. Dr. Pierce nodded and gestured to the chair beside him. "Take a deep breath. Close your eyes. Let your mind drift back to that night." David obeyed, the darkness behind his eyelids swirling as he tried to recall anything from that fateful evening. He could hear the laughter of the party in the distance, the smell of food filling the air. He remembered stepping out onto the balcony, feeling the cool evening breeze against his skin. And then, nothing. The void, the blackness. His heart raced. "I don't remember anything after that," he whispered. Dr. Pierce remained calm. "That's okay. Just let your mind follow the thread, wherever it leads. You may not remember consciously, but your mind may still hold on to the details. Keep breathing." David felt his body tense, a cold sweat beginning to form on his forehead. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he thought he could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. The faint sound of someone moving through the house. "David," Dr. Pierce's voice cut through the fog of his thoughts. "Focus. What do you feel right now?" The tension in David's chest was growing, like something was pressing against his ribs. He clenched his fists, desperate to maintain control. But then, in the quiet of his mind, he heard it again, the voice. "It's not me," the voice whispered, cold and distant. "You don't deserve them." David's eyes snapped open, his heart thundering in his ears. "What the hell was that?" he gasped, his breath coming in short bursts. Dr. Pierce didn't seem startled. "It's okay. This is part of the process. What you just experienced is likely a manifestation of a separate personality or memory that you've blocked out. It's common in cases of DID. Your mind has created another persona to protect you from the trauma." David's hands shook as he gripped the armrest of the chair. "I don't understand. Why would I want to hurt my family?" "Sometimes," Dr. Pierce said softly, "when the pressure becomes too much, the mind splits in order to cope. It's not about wanting to hurt anyone. It's about trying to survive. The part of you that may have done this, if it exists, likely doesn't even recognize the consequences of its actions." David felt a wave of nausea. His head spun with the realization that there was a part of him, buried deep in his mind, that could have been capable of something so horrific. He could feel the weight of the truth settling over him like a suffocating blanket. Dr. Pierce's voice brought him back. "David, it's important that we continue. The more we uncover, the more we can understand. But you must be willing to face these truths, no matter how painful." David looked at the doctor, his mind in chaos. Could he really face the truth? Could he unlock the parts of himself that he was too terrified to remember? For a long moment, he didn't speak, lost in the torment of his own thoughts. The voice, the memories, it all felt like a dream, an awful, haunting dream that he couldn't escape from. But deep down, he knew one thing. The truth, whatever it was buried inside him. And no matter how dark or painful it might be, he had to find it. "I'm ready," David said quietly, though his voice betrayed his fear. Dr. Pierce nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Then let's begin." The session with Dr. Pierce continued, each passing minute like a quiet storm, gathering in David's mind. As the doctor guided him through the depths of his fractured memory, David's reality began to shift. It was as if he was standing on the edge of an abyss, the shadows of his past stretching before him, waiting to swallow him whole. "Focus, David," Dr. Pierce's voice echoed through the fog of David's mind. "What do you feel right now?" David's chest tightened. He could feel his breath quicken, the air in the room suddenly too thick. I feel like I'm losing control," he said, his voice shaky. "Like I'm not the one in charge. Like someone else was inside me." "Good," Dr. Pierce said. "That's the first step. Let the memory come to the surface. Don't fight it." David closed his eyes, trying to block out the panic rising within him. He couldn't understand what was happening. Why now? Why this? But the voice, that whisper in his mind, was growing louder. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a presence, cold and detached. "You can't trust yourself," it hissed. "You never could." David's heart raced as the darkness of the memory began to take shape. The fleeting images from that night, the sounds of the party, the laughter, the joy, were replaced by something far darker. A figure stood in the corner of the room, shadowed and silent. It wasn't a person he recognized, but as the images sharpened, David's stomach churned. It was him, or something that looked like him, standing there, watching, waiting. "I remember," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "I remember being there, but I wasn't in control." Dr. Pierce was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. "What do you mean, David? What weren't you in control of?" David swallowed hard. I couldn't stop myself. I was watching, but it wasn't me. Not completely. There was something else. Someone else. It was like I was in a cage. And this thing inside me was free." "David, listen to me carefully," Dr. Pierce said, his tone steady. "What you're describing is an altered state of consciousness, a dissociative episode. It's possible that your mind split that night to protect you from the trauma, but it's also possible that another personality took control." David's head spun as the truth began to settle over him, suffocating him. The idea of having another personality, someone else who could have done this, someone who could have hurt his family, was too much to bear. Was this the real reason he couldn't remember? Was this the reason he felt so disconnected from the reality of what had happened? "Why don't I remember any of it?" David asked, his voice strained. "Why can't I recall what happened after I found them?" "Your mind has likely blocked out the traumatic event," Dr. Pierce explained. "The memory of the killings may be too much for you to process. It's possible that the other personality, the one that took over, is preventing you from accessing those memories." David's mind reeled. Was it possible? Could the fragments of memory he was seeing be the key to unlocking the truth? Could it be that his mind had split in a way he couldn't understand? "I need to remember," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know the truth." Dr. Pierce nodded. "I understand. But remember, this process isn't quick. The mind doesn't always reveal the truth easily. You need to be patient with yourself." David nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Patience. But how could he be patient when everything in his life had been turned upside down? How could he be patient when the truth of his family's death was locked away inside him? The session continued, but David's thoughts were clouded with more questions than answers. The memories were still scattered, like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. He could see himself in the hallway, standing over his family, but everything beyond that was a blur. Was the person who killed them truly a part of him? Or was it something else entirely, something darker, something that had been lurking in the shadows of his mind all along? As Dr. Pierce guided him through more exercises, David began to feel a deeper sense of unease. There were moments when he felt the presence of that other personality, lurking just beneath the surface of his thoughts. It was as though it was watching him, waiting for the right moment to take control again. After the session ended, David left Dr. Pierce's office feeling more unsettled than ever. The questions, the fears, they had only multiplied. His world had become a labyrinth of confusion, with no clear way out. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. Was it possible that he had killed his family? Or was there another, darker force at play, one that had been manipulating him from the inside? As David walked down the street, the weight of his own mind pressing down on him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That same voice, that same whisper, echoed in his ears. "You'll never escape me." David couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of his mind were closing in on him. The days after his session with Dr. Pierce felt like a blur, his thoughts fragmented, his emotions scattered. The questions he had about his own life, his family, and that night of terror weighed heavily on him. Each day, he felt closer to the truth, but also further from understanding it. The sense that something dark had been lurking in the corners of his mind, the idea that there was a part of him capable of unimaginable things, gnawed at him relentlessly. That night, David found himself in the same room again, sitting across from Dr. Pierce. The doctor's steady gaze remained unchanged, but David felt more restless than ever before. "David," Dr. Pierce began, his tone calm but serious. "We've made some progress, but we need to confront what's been holding you back. You've experienced dissociation, but it's time we look deeper, at the part of you that might be causing this, the part you've been avoiding." David's throat tightened as he remembered the voice, the one that whispered things to him, things that didn't feel like his own thoughts. "I'm afraid of what we'll find," David admitted, his voice shaky. "What if the truth is worse than I think?" Dr. Pierce nodded slowly, understanding. "It's not unusual to fear what's buried in the subconscious, but facing it is the only way forward. It's the only way to heal." David took a deep breath. He wanted to believe Dr. Pierce. He wanted to trust that the answers would bring him peace. But as the minutes passed, he felt a growing unease, a feeling that something was about to break free, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "We'll begin with something simple," Dr. Pierce said, his voice gentle. "I want you to relax, to close your eyes, and let your mind wander. This is a safe space, David. You're in control." David closed his eyes, trying to focus on his breathing. But as he did, his mind began to race. The images from that night, the blood, the lifeless bodies, the strange detachment he felt, came rushing back. He could see himself standing in the hallway again, the weight of his family's death hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. But then, something shifted. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was something else, something darker. He could hear the voice again, the one that had haunted him. "You can't trust yourself," it hissed. "You never could." David gasped, opening his eyes wide in terror. "What the hell was that?" he gasped, his breath coming in short bursts. Dr. Pierce didn't seem startled. "It's okay. This is part of the process. What you just experienced is likely a manifestation of a separate personality or memory that you've blocked out. It's common in cases of DID. Your mind has created another persona to protect you from the trauma." David's hands shook as he gripped the armrest of the chair. "I don't understand. Why would I want to hurt my family?" "Sometimes," Dr. Pierce said softly, "when the pressure becomes too much, the mind splits in order to cope. It's not about wanting to hurt anyone. It's about trying to survive. The part of you that may have done this, if it exists, likely doesn't even recognize the consequences of its actions." David felt a wave of nausea. But what if I am the one who did it? What if I'm the one who killed them? The words hung in the air like a threat, chilling him to the bone. David had never fully allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might have been responsible. But now, with Dr. Pierce's words echoing in his ears, it felt undeniable. What if everything he had been hiding, all the disjointed memories, were actually pieces of the truth? Dr. Pierce leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "David, you've come a long way, but we need to dig deeper. Your mind is trying to protect you, to hide the truth, because it's too much for you to handle. But you need to confront it. You need to face what happened that night. David closed his eyes again, trying to push past the fear, trying to focus on the voice. "I can't," he whispered. "It's too much. I can't do this." The room felt suffocating, the silence heavy between them. David could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He was afraid, terrified even, but the need to understand, to know what happened that night, overpowered everything else. He took another deep breath, willing himself to push through the fear. And then it came. The memory, once buried and fragmented, came flooding back in a flash. The hallway, his family, the blood, the coldness in his own heart. But what stood out the most was the moment he realized he wasn't alone. There was someone else with him, someone who had been watching, someone who had been in control. It wasn't just him. It was something else, something he hadn't fully understood until now. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, David's world started to shift. He wasn't the person he thought he was. David sat in Dr. Pierce's office, the silence between them stretching longer than either of them seemed comfortable with. His mind raced, the new revelation still settling, as if trying to break through a fog he couldn't quite shake. What did this mean? The voice he had been hearing, the sudden memories flooding back, the realization that someone else had been there in that house with him. All of it felt like a puzzle he could never quite solve. Dr. Pierce broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. "David, we need to understand what happened. You've made progress today, but we're not done yet. You're beginning to connect the dots, but there's still more to uncover." David swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know if I can do this anymore. I've spent so much time trying to forget, and now it feels like I'm losing my mind." "I understand," Dr. Pierce said softly. "It's overwhelming, but facing the truth is the only way to heal. The more we uncover, the clearer things will become. You don't have to do this alone." David nodded, the weight of the words pressing down on him. "What if I never understand what happened? What if the truth is worse than I think?" "The truth might not be what you expect, but it's something you need to face," Dr. Pierce replied. "Your mind is trying to protect you, David. The dissociation, the memory blocks. It's all a way for you to avoid confronting what you've been through. But it's time to let go of the fear and allow yourself to remember." David's heart raced as he closed his eyes. His thoughts spiraled back to the night of the murders, that overwhelming sense of dread, the confusion, and then the unsettling realization that something else had been inside him. Someone else. Could it be that he had truly lost control? That another version of him had committed the unthinkable? "David, I want you to trust your mind, even when it's difficult," Dr. Pierce continued. "The truth is already inside you, even if you don't fully comprehend it yet." David took a deep breath. He felt on the edge, teetering between the man he was and the man he was terrified of becoming. The fear of what he might uncover gripped him, but he knew deep down that there was no other way. He had to keep going. "Okay," David whispered. "I'm ready." Dr. Pierce nodded. "Good. Let's begin again. Close your eyes and focus on the memory. Let it come to the surface. You're in control." David obeyed, pushing aside the anxiety that clawed at him. As the darkness behind his eyelids consumed him, his mind wandered back to that night, back to the moments he had desperately tried to avoid. The air had been thick with laughter and joy, his parents celebrating his achievement, and then it all stopped. He was standing in the hallway, the silence pressing in around him, the warmth of the house replaced by a chilling coldness. He could hear his family's voices echoing faintly, but then it all went dark. But now, as he focused, something else surfaced. The image of the masked figure, the sensation of detachment, and then a sudden shift. It was like a switch had been flipped, and David could feel himself, no, not himself, moving, watching, but not acting. It was as if he was standing in a cage, locked away, powerless to stop the actions of the figure that wore his skin. The memories were fragmented, chaotic, like pieces of a broken mirror. But one thing was clear. The person in the mask, the one who moved with terrifying precision, wasn't David. It was something else, something darker. "David, what are you seeing?" Dr. Pierce asked, his voice drawing David back to the present. I was there, but I wasn't. It was like someone else was in control," David said, his voice shaking. "It was like I was trapped inside myself, unable to stop it." "Keep going," Dr. Pierce urged. "What else do you remember?" David's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The voice, the figure, the sensation of being a passenger in his own body. It was all so clear now. Someone had been in control that night, and it wasn't him. "I didn't want to hurt them," David whispered. "But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop what was happening." "That's the dissociation, David," Dr. Pierce explained gently. "You've been living with the trauma of that night, and your mind fractured to protect you from the full extent of what happened. You didn't commit the murders consciously, but a part of you did." David's mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the situation. The fear that had always lingered in the back of his mind was now an undeniable truth. A part of him, someone else, had taken control. But who? And why? "Dr. Pierce, what does this mean?" David asked, his voice filled with desperation. "Am I the killer? Did I?" Dr. Pierce cut him off gently. "No, David, you weren't yourself. This is a condition, not a sign of who you are. It's your mind trying to protect you, to cope with the trauma, but it also created a separate identity. And that identity, whatever it was, took the actions that night." David felt sick. It wasn't him, but it was his body. His family was gone, and the guilt, the confusion, flooded his every thought. He wasn't the person he thought he was. Could he ever recover from this? Could he ever forgive himself? The weight of everything was almost too much to bear. The person he thought he was, who he wanted to be, was slipping further away, and the truth about his family's death was becoming clearer with every passing moment. "David," Dr. Pierce said quietly, "the path ahead isn't easy, but you can begin to heal. The truth is painful, but it will set you free." David's mind was a storm, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The days that followed David's breakthrough with Dr. Pierce felt like an endless blur. The truth was no longer something lurking in the shadows. It was here, standing in the light, exposed for all to see. But knowing the truth didn't make things any easier. In fact, it only made them more complicated. The voice, the presence, the fear that had lived inside him for so long. It had been a part of him all along, a part that could no longer be ignored. David had always thought of himself as the good son, the boy with potential, the one who could make his parents proud. He had worked tirelessly to meet their expectations, to be the person they wanted him to be. But now, standing on the precipice of understanding, David had to face the reality that he wasn't just that person. He wasn't just the son, the student, the valedictorian. There was another part of him, a darker, more dangerous part that had been hiding in the recesses of his mind, waiting for the moment when it could break free. It was that part of him, the part that had killed his family, that he now had to confront. The guilt was overwhelming, the shame suffocating. David had spent so much of his life running from the truth, burying it deep inside, afraid of what it might mean if he ever faced it. But now, as the memories flooded back in full force, he realized that running from it had never made it go away. It had only festered, like a wound left untreated, growing deeper and more painful with time. He sat in his apartment late one night, his hands shaking as he stared at the wall in front of him. The silence was deafening, and his thoughts felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. He could still hear the voice, the one that had whispered to him, taunted him, encouraged him. He had always tried to push it away, to convince himself it was just a figment of his imagination, a symptom of the pressure he had been under. But now he knew the truth. It had never been a figment. The voice was real. It was a part of him, a part that had taken control of his actions when he wasn't looking. And when he had killed his family, it hadn't been him. It had been something else, someone else. But the worst part? That someone else had always been inside him. David clutched his head in his hands, trying to make sense of the chaos in his mind. What was left for him now? How could he ever move forward when everything he had built his life around had been shattered? His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Richard. David hesitated before answering. Richard had been there for him through everything, through the trial, through the pain. But how could David explain to him what he had learned? How could he tell him the truth without sounding like a madman? "David?" Richard's voice came through the phone, sounding tired, but concerned. "Are you okay? I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about what happened that night." David took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "Richard, I don't know if I can ever be okay again." "What do you mean?" Richard asked, his tone shifting to one of worry. "I know what happened," David said, his voice shaking. "I know who did it. I know what I did." Richard was silent for a moment, and then David heard him take a deep breath. "David, whatever it is, we'll figure it out. You don't have to do this alone." David's heart twisted with guilt. Richard didn't know the full truth, not yet. He didn't know that the person who had committed the murders wasn't someone else. It was him, or at least, a part of him. "No, Richard," David said, his voice breaking. "I don't think we can figure this out. I don't know who I am anymore." "David." "I killed them, Richard," David interrupted, the words falling out in a rush. "I killed my family. It was me, but it wasn't me. I don't know how to explain it, but I wasn't in control. There was something else inside me, something that took over." Richard's voice was quiet, steady. "David, you're not alone in this. We'll work through it. You've been through a lot, and the truth, it's not something you can handle overnight. But you'll get through this." David closed his eyes, letting Richard's words sink in, but they offered little comfort. "What if I can't? What if this is who I really am?" "No, David," Richard said, firm but kind. "What happened that night doesn't define who you are. You can heal. You can move forward. Don't let the past control you." David hung up the phone and sat in the silence that followed. Could he ever forgive himself for what he had done? Could he rebuild a life after everything he had lost? The questions were endless, the answers elusive. But one thing was clear. The truth, as painful as it was, had set him on a new path, a path where redemption might be possible if he was willing to fight for it. And that, David realized, was the first step. If you've been pulled into David's twisted journey and are wondering just how far this descent goes, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Come along as we uncover the truth, the darkness lurking beneath, and the horrors that await. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next, because it's only going to get darker.